Welcome to Demented Squirrel Crafts. This week is about the Lunar New Year, because this year is a firehorse. And as my creatures are called Lunakins, based on their round faces, based on the moon, I'm definitely going to celebrate this one. So I'm doing my usual basing routine. I'm using an 8cm egg, a 4-inch egg, a weight at the bottom, glue in the weight, cover the first layer in red, poke loads of holes in it so that when it dries, the moisture can escape. Leave it to dry completely. Normally I leave it overnight. Once that's all dry, we'll get on to the next stage. So the big part of this is to make the clay look like fire. So I'm going to create an ombre effect. So I'm mixing my three clays together. So the orange is a slightly neon orange that you can buy as standard, and the yellow is like a sunshine yellow. And I'm just going to create an ombre effect by twisting them together, rolling them out, squishing them together, twisting them together, rolling them out, and continue until I have a really nice blend going on. I work quickly at this stage because this is air drying clay and it will dry in the air, but I'm quite happy with my bacon flame looking mix. I'm quite happy with this. So for the tail, I just cut 6 little pieces off, and then I rolled them into a basic taper in order to make them into a long, elegant tail. And I do it roughly by hand first, and then I use a piece of acrylic to roll it smooth and roll it into a uniform taper so that they all look very cohesive and very elegant. Once they're all rolled out, I then add them together to make sure that they circle the larger one than the small one. And then I'm going to twist them into a nice form, as if it's a flame coming out from a bonfire or that sort of a thing. I don't squash them together because I wanted them to have some movement and look slightly alive. I'm also going to form it around the egg and in a form that makes it look alive, so that it's got a lot of movement and looks like a living flame. I'm going to dry it in that shape. So I'm going to use a little tub to put it in to give it some support. And then I just leave that to dry. Because I want the body and the tail to match, I'm going to use the same block of ombre clay that I just made. I'm going to roll it out to a couple of millimeters thin, make sure it's wide enough for my base, and then I'm going to wrap it around my base. I'm going to adhere it to the clay by only using a vertical motion. And that way I will move the clay up and down the base so it looks like it's more organic. It looks more like a flame, like if it was a bonfire. And so you can see here, as I'm pushing the clay up the egg, the line of where the orange and yellow is moving around and looking far more organic, but in a very uniform direction. I then make sure it's all smoothed out, make sure that it's all covered. And then once all that's done, I'm going to add texture. I'm going to make the texture by using a nectarine stone that's been bleached and dried out and completely dead. And it's a texture tool that I like to use for creating organic texture. I smooth out some, I add some more texture, I smooth it out again. And once that's all done, then I leave it to dry. While the body's drying, we're going to make the mane, all the hair for the little creature. I'm using this icing nozzle, icing tip. It's a metal one, you can use plastic ones. I just happen to have a metal one. And you just squash the clay through it so it takes on the form, the same as you would do if you were icing a cake. If you wanted to make a foam cake, this is a fantastic way of making replica icing and replica cake decorations. You can use it all the time. You could use a bag, put all the clay in the bag and squash it through and that sort of thing. That's not a problem. I find that a bit too much cleanup, so I just make it with my finger. I did mix some cornstarch into the clay to make it a little bit stiffer so it would hold the shapes a little bit better. And then I used a different nozzle to make some smaller ones and made sure that they all looked a bit right and looked a bit more fluid. And it's just an easy way of making a lot of textured parts quite easily. I like using nozzle tips for this method. As you can see here, I've made some smaller ones that are going to go along the edge, and you just then stick them all on. So I spent some time faffing about with this, to be honest, because I have lots of options here, and I wanted to look very much like a flame and a whole bunch of flames all together. And so I did spend some time like selecting the right shapes and putting them in the right order and attaching them together, and then forgot where the camera was. I'm going to move my camera for the next few videos and see how that works out, so that's why I'm speed running this. And also, you don't need to watch me adhere tiny little pieces of foam together. You can see what's generally happening here. So you just add in as much or as little as you like. I added in the really narrow ones to the outside and the fatter ones to the inside, and then I fluffed them about, and I made sure the points looked good, and I made sure they connected well, and then I left it to dry completely. Once the mane is completely dry, I'm going to attach the tail. So I just cut the end off the tail, and that made a flat surface and exposed the fresh clay in the inside because it hadn't 100% dried yet. And so I could attach it really easily, put it into the form that I liked for its final positioning, and then I added the ears. So the ears I made the way I normally make my ears, with a little half circle, folded them over, made sure they were the right shape and looked like a horse's ear as opposed to a bunny rabbit or a cat, and then just cut the bottom off so that I could attach it to the body, make sure that it looked symmetrical and looked more like a horse than it did anything else, and then I just left it completely to dry before I moved on to the face. So I made my face the way I always make my faces, with a little sausage of clay, and then I squash it flat so that it's oval shaped, and then I make sure that it matches the creature. Maybe it needs to be a bit more longer in the face or a bit more round in the face. And this is the reason why my creatures are called Lunakins. Luna for the moon, kin for creature, because the face is just a big round face with just eyes. So it looks like a moon, the man in the moon. It makes it easy to make creatures without having to worry about noses or mouths or that sort of thing. So once I was happy with how the face was placed, then I used my chopstick as normal to make the space for the rhinestone to go into. And I just used red rhinestones because I was thinking, oh, I'll use black, but that looked too harsh. And then I was going to use yellow, but the yellow I had was too yellow. It was more like, it was the wrong sort of yellow. It was too green of a yellow rather than a warm yellow. So I thought, I'll use red. It's a lucky colour. It's all good. Now, when you use rhinestones into the clay, when you push the rhinestones in, the clay envelops it and makes a little border around the eyes. So normally they never pop out, so I don't have to use glue. And then I just use the end to make a couple of little freckle marks on the side of the face, and that's all good. And then I decided I wanted to add some plum blossoms, because this is the Lunar New Year, so it's a Asian festival. I'm quite close to that culture. I like it a lot, and so I thought I'll add in these tiny little plum blossoms. So this is a fimo pastry cutter. It was super cheap, and I'm just going to cut out loads of little flowers. I added 9 because 9 is a lucky number, and so the way that I added them was using this dotting tool. I think it's for nail art, and I just use it to squash the flower into the clay, like just make them attach together, because if I use my finger too hard, it will squash right in and you'll lose the 3D-ness. But the other reason I did it with the dotting tool is because I wanted to add in tiny little rhinestones that I found that were part of a bigger rhinestone set, and they're perfect for these tiny little details like this. So you can see here how small these rhinestones were. They were very fiddly to try and get off the backing and put into the right place and make sure that they were nicely adhered in, and then making sure that none of them are falling out and that I haven't missed one. And then I left everything to dry completely before I did the final step. But I really like how it's turning out so far. Once it's completely dried, I decided to add in some highlights and some details using pastel chalks. So I'm just adding some little highlights in the orange to the tips of all the flames, give it a little bit more depth. And then I decided I would, try and highlight the flowers. And then I'm using a little bit of black in order to do like a tiny amount of detail on the top of the points, like the ears and the tail. I put some on the face, decided I hated it, removed it with some alcohol, and it was all good. And then I just added in a little bit more touches to the flowers and called it good. I'm quite chuffed with how it turned out and how well it matched my little chaos doodle inspiration. Now it's time for pretty pictures. If you like what you see, you can subscribe. I also do some time lapses and other videos and stuff on my Patreon. Thanks for everybody for the support. If you stay to the very end, there's a little sneaky of the next video. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful week. Bye.